Yeah, what I'll do, Karen, is we'll introduce you. We'll just introduce you and we'll open. I'll ask Brother George to open in prayer. And then when you get started, I'll do the share screen.
Oh, okay. That's fine. That's great.
All right.
Yeah, that's good.
All right. We are live on Southside Facebook. So everybody who's joining us tonight, what I'll do, Karen, is just introduce you and we'll 1 second. It always does that. Welcome everyone to Wednesday night Bible study. Tonight we have Sister Karen will be teaching. We're looking forward to that. I've seen her notes, so I'm excited about it. I think it's good. The last 2 weeks we had with Brother George were just awesome, dynamic, and we're still, I mean, you can tell when lessons are good when people are talking about them through the week. So that's a good sign. And I just want to thank all of you for your faithfulness in being here on Wednesday nights. Those of you who are tuning in on Facebook, I see Wanda just checked in, and my niece Crystal is on Facebook. Thank you all for joining us. This has just been a great way of communicating with each other and really studying the Bible together. We love to be together, but this has been very convenient for us even after we've returned to in-person church services on Sundays. I do want to remind you about a few things. I see Karen Sorensen saying hello too. A couple of things for this week. We will have our Celebrating Good News tomorrow night at 7. Remember, on Saturday, we are doing drive-through prayer. And today, the staff and some of us who meet on Wednesday put together candy bags for children. So we have a bunch of candy bags for children for the cars that come through and get prayed for. We want to bless them with those. So if you know of people, we want, as I said on Sunday, we want people from the church to come, and we want you, if you can't volunteer and be there at 9, we would love for you to come and get prayed for at 10. Just drive through, let us see your faces. We promise we won't open the door and try to get in the car with you and hug you and kiss you and all that stuff. But it's just nice to see faces. And I know I appreciate people who are being careful, and we're careful on Saturday. This is a way that we know that we can do ministry and still be careful and be able to see each other and connect in that way. So that's Saturday morning. We have changed the time slightly. It's 10 to 12 for the actual drive-through prayer. And then everything else is, it starts at 9 o'clock. The volunteers start at 9. So I've got people texting me now. Brother George, would you open us up in prayer, please?
Yeah, no problem. So, Father, you are the source and the giver of all wisdom and all truth, and we ask you tonight, help us to be diligent in what we do, accurate in our study. Give us clarity of mind, and give us the enthusiasm to listen to our teacher as she teaches us. Lord, I pray that your light will shine in our hearts and that we will know where to go and what to do when we listen to our teacher tonight. Grant us wisdom, I pray. And this I ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Karen Mullens will be teaching tonight. She'll also be teaching next Wednesday night too. And we just, we appreciate you, Karen. I'm going to mute everybody else but Karen on here. Karen, you got Pastor, I think you may be wanting to say, hey,
Oh, that's fine.
Go ahead, Pastor.
He's muted right now.
Yeah, unmute yourself.
Okay. There it is. Did you get that?
Yeah.
Oh. Hello, everybody. I'll be with the Wild Bunch, but I'll be listening to you guys as well. Bless you, Karen.
Thank you, Pastor.
All right.
All right. So Karen, I'm gonna share the screen and then I'm gonna let you get started. All right, and just
ahead.
let me know when I need to advance it. There we go. Hold on. Let me get it to the beginning of it,
That would be good, but that's okay.
so I don't have to go all the way through it. 1 second. Can you see all this, or you're just seeing?
No, I'm just seeing you, so it's good.
Okay. All right, perfect. All right, here we.
Okay.
There you go.
All right. So tonight the title is Line Judge, and we're probably going to get more into that next week. But as I study the Bible anymore, it seems like I'm doing a lot of word studies. I'll pray about what the next thing is that I'm supposed to study about. And several months ago, I felt like I needed to study about judgment and the word judgment in the Bible. And so I looked up all the verses using the Strong's Concordance: judge, judgment, judging, discipline, condemnation, righteousness, all those kinds of words that seem connected, chastising. And in the process of doing all that and looking at all of those words, I came up with some interesting ideas that I felt like that I should share with you tonight. With the election being so close, and I didn't even know that pastor was going to talk about this on Sunday until after I'd already realized that we're going to end up talking about the voting and politics tonight, not so much because that's like the main focus of where I intended to go, but because it kind of is a living example of how we use judgment and times that we can use judgment. So next week, we'll probably get more into the Bible study of the word judgment and where those things came from. So I did not originally plan for this lesson to be political in nature. But given the timing that I didn't specifically choose, it just kind of happened to fall when we're starting early voting. It seemed like God was impressing on me that I really needed to take this topic and apply it to voting tonight. So with that being said, it wasn't my intention to go this way, but this is the way it ended up. Some political beliefs are not based on the Bible. No, you would not believe that's true, but that is true, as you all know. So sometimes I'll be speaking in general about biblical judgment, wise judgment, those kinds of things. And it may sound like I'm speaking against a party or, candidate or whatever, but my job isn't to tell you who to vote for. But due to the timing of this, I feel like part of what God has tasked me to do with this lesson is to remind you your vote matters. Your vote represents God. God gave us the authority to choose. And so as we talk about the biblical view of judgment, part of what you need to consider is who should I vote for? And what should I base that decision on? So while my original intention was to talk about how if and when as Christians we should judge, who we should judge, what we should judge, if we should judge, and that was kind of the overarching goal of these lessons. This is an example of how to judge and how to choose who we vote for. So Dwayne, if you could go to the next page for me. We have the most famous verse here that I think everyone knows. Judge not that you be not judged, for with what judgment you judge, you shall be judged. And with what measure ye meet, it shall be measured to you again. And why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye, but considerest not the beam that is in thine own eye? On some program several years ago, I heard that the most quoted verse these days is this verse, Matthew 7:1. Judge not that you be not judged. And I kind of would consider that maybe to be true, especially by people who weren't necessarily Christians. Not too long ago, several months ago, John and I were watching NCIS because it's like his favorite show. And I was in the room, so I was watching it too. But so their search took them to this church, and there was a lady. She wasn't a pastor or anything like that, but she was a church attender. She was a volunteer. She was like in cleaning the church or something in the interim, nobody else was in there. So they come in there to ask her a couple of questions or look for someone. I don't remember the specifics now. And while they're in there, they're asking her, she goes into a gossip session and starts telling them all the dirt on whichever person they're looking for. And then she walks them outside and thanks them for coming and that kind of thing. And the church, because it's a storefront building, like an urban setting, and the marquee right above the door that they pan up to says, "Judge not, that ye be not judged." So did that verse apply to this lady? Probably, yeah, because she was gossiping. That's for sure and certain what she was doing. But does this verse mean that God forbids us from judging people ever? Okay, if you go to the next slide, we have another verse, 1 Peter 5:20, and this is the AMPC, Amplified Classic Version of the Bible. "And as for those who are guilty and persist in sin, rebuke and admonish them in the presence of all, so that the rest may be warned and stand in wholesome awe and fear." So predominant American culture today says, you have absolutely no right to judge me and my life's choices. But if we read this verse, those in the church were said to rebuke and admonish those who are guilty and persist in sin. So does this verse apply, or does the judge and be not judged verse apply? And hopefully next week we'll get more into that. So is this something we should do? Should we call people to the front of the church and admonish them in the presence of everyone and rebuke them for their sin? So part of the reason why we study the Bible is to kind of figure out, because frequently in the Bible, there are things that seem to conflict. And we have to kind of weigh them with the totality of the Bible. I've heard not too long ago that the key of the Bible is love. And if you can interpret the whole Bible based on realizing that God is love, his word is love, and applying those truths. And so that's kind of what I've been studying, and that's what I hope to share. The more the biblical part, as far as the details, more so next week. But anyway, so in the New Testament, the forms of the word judge, like judging and judgment and judged and those kind of things, that word judge has more than one meaning. And on the next slide, you'll see. Now this came from Strong's Concordance, and what is judgment? There's more than one definition listed on the page, but as I kind of boiled it down, I realized it was mainly two themes. Okay, to assume the office of judge. In other words, in Matthew 7:1, where you make, that's the verse that I quoted, judge not, lest you be judged, where you make yourself a judge, an official judge. That's your role, that's your title, you're authorized to do it, you're a judge. Or to form an opinion. And so I just picked one of these verses that's listed here. And so this is a less than official capacity. And Acts 4:19, if you'll see, it's listed there behind to form an opinion, because that's the way I quoted it from the Strong's Concordance. But Peter and John answered and said unto them, whether it be right in the sight of God to hearken unto you more than unto God, ye judge. And it's the same word. So that word judge can mean like the official office of a judge, an official judgment, those kinds of things. Or it can mean someone's opinion. Here, obviously, the right opinion would be to listen to God, but it's used as an opinion. Okay. So basically, it's like legal judgment versus personal judgment. So in the next few slides, I'm going to show you some photos with some choices. And as I show you the slides, I want you to make a choice. Think about which one you would choose and think about why you made that choice. And it's not trick questions. There's no right or wrong answers. This is just more about your opinion, your judgment. So if you could go to the next slide. Okay, so if you're out shopping, which store would you choose? And if someone wouldn't mind answering that question for me and telling me why, I would greatly appreciate it. You have to come look. Don can't see the video. Anybody have a response for that one? Which store would you choose?
The one on the right.
Okay, why would you choose the one on the right, George? And thank you so much for responding.
Because it looks nice.
Okay. All right, Wayne, go ahead and go to the next one. Okay, we have two houses here. Which house would you choose? And if someone wants, if George wants to respond again, since you're already on, that would be great as well.
Yeah, I'll have the one on the left.
Okay, and why is that?
Because it looks as if it's been well kept.
Okay, what if I were to tell you, George, that the one on the right, the reason why there's so much junk out there is because that came from the garage in the yard. And the house is immaculate, that they've just been really actively cleaning out the garage and the yard. Everything's piled up there. It's getting ready to leave. And the house on the left that looks so neat is full of termites. Would that change your decision?
It may do, yes.
Okay, and we have one more here. Go ahead. Okay, which friend would you prefer your child to spend time with to become friends with? Now, I'm going to give you a little background because it's not fair to judge people based solely on what they look like. And obviously, you know, not being in, anyway. So the group of the three teenagers, they're all Christians. They just came from a Bible study. They're going through the contact list on that girl's phone so they can decide who to invite to Bible study next week. The guy on the right does not believe in God. He's rather rebellious and he always seems to be angry. So if you have a teenager and they are going to date or hang out with either one of people in these groups, which group would you prefer? George, would you like to answer that one?
Oh yes, I mean it's. I'll go for the group with the three people on the left.
Right. Okay. Why would you do that?
Because the other one, as you pointed out, is constantly in trouble. And if I expected my children, one of my child, to be spending time with anyone, it possibly would be the three. If I was going to make a judgment, it would be the three teenagers. Right.
Okay. Okay. Now go ahead and go to the next one. And George, we won't make you answer this one. Okay. So you can, thank you for your response, but you can. Yeah. All right. Now, which candidate will you choose? Okay. I'm not going to have anybody answer this one, but I want you to think about why you are making this choice. Why are you choosing the one that you're choosing? Have you noticed how much anger there is around politics, and especially this election? People are afraid to put signs in their yard because they're afraid something's going to happen. Why is there so much anger? What do you do with that anger? And should you be angry? Okay, the next slide. I happened to listen to a radio show a couple months ago. Actually, it was September 22nd, I wrote down the date. It's the Backyard Fence with Chris Fabry on Moody. And he was interviewing a guy. And the topic of the show is why we get so angry during election season and what to do about it. So, of course, I took notes on it because it seemed to go in with judgment. And it was kind of an interesting topic. And so I kind of went on the website and I found this link to this Christian Post little article that the man that was being interviewed, this Joel Malm that wrote the book Love Slows Down, it was like a little article that he'd written kind of to give you a synopsis of the book. And it was kind of what the radio show was on as well. So I haven't read the book, but I did read the article and I did listen to most of the show. So Joel says that anger isn't a sin, it's just a sign. It's a sign that you feel threatened. He went on to say that anger is a secondary emotion, and I've heard that more than once. Basically, anger is a response to something else. Another emotion happens first, or another trigger happens first that causes the anger. There's normally, anyway. So anger is a secondary emotion. It comes after we feel a threat to one or all three of these specific things. Security, which can be physical, emotional, financial. Connection, which is self-esteem, feeling seen and understood. And control, which is a sense of empowerment, free will, and having choices and options. And at the root of all anger is the fear of not getting one of those things or the fear of having it taken away. Okay, the next slide. Okay, I tried to find some campaign ads. So I found a long one from a long time ago because I didn't want to be controversial. So think about the campaign ads you've heard on TV or on the radio. Are very many of them negative ads? Why are there so many negative ads? According to Joel Baum, who wrote that book and was interviewed, he said that fear drives action. And he also went on to say that fear is rarely rational, which is why you cannot overcome fear with facts. If someone is terrified of spiders and they are standing on a chair, afraid to get down, you can't talk them out of that fear. They react because their fear in that point in time is controlling them. And as I learned as a teacher in one of my education classes, and also in the article that by this gentleman, he said that when you are in fight or fright, excuse me, I can't say that, but anyway, when you're afraid, you go into fight or flight. And in that mode of fight or flight, basically the frontal cortex of your brain, the part that handles rationale and reasoning and all that kind of stuff, it doesn't really work very well. And it goes to the lower stem cell, which has to do with survival. And so whenever you are afraid, you do not think irrationally. Okay, go ahead and turn the page. Or excuse me, next slide. So who will you choose and why? The guy who wrote the book also said, at our core, even the most rational of us are highly emotional people who find facts to back up what we feel, which I think sometimes the Facebook posts have to do with that. There's an art, someone said something and, oh yeah, this is really good. And this goes along with how I feel and supports my feeling and validates my feeling. And so I'll post it. But he goes on to say that fear drives you to action. And action is what politicians, what the media, what companies that are trying to tell you something they all want. They all want you to do something. They want you to vote for them. They want you to keep watching their TV programs or their news programs. They want you to buy their products. And fear has the power to get you moving in the direction that they want you to go. He also says that both sides of the political spectrum have their specific fears, all related to security, connection, and control, which were those three things that he said were the key things that cause your fear. He says, if it's a fear of having your guns taken away, that's a threat to security and control. If you fear the country is becoming uncompassionate and to those people that are hurting and to refugees, then that has to do with the fear of connection. And if you feel that the government telling our churches what they can and can't do, that would have to do with control. So each side is playing on your fear. And they choose the fear that appeals the most to their voter base, and it works. But it also makes us really angry at the other side because it makes us aware that they're trying to take something away from us, that they are threatening us. Now, there is truth weave through what's being said, and I'm not saying everything out there is a lie to promote it. You know, fear has normally a line of truth in it, but it takes it sometimes to an extreme, and they do that on purpose to move us in the direction they want us to go. So in short, they're using our fear to manipulate us. So I want you to think back about the other options that I gave you. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, which did you judge to be the best choice? Okay, we make judgments all the time. We decide which investments we're going to make, which charities we're going to give to, which friends do you want hanging out with your teenagers, which friends do you trust with your biggest fears, which ones can you be open with and know that they're not going to talk about you behind your back, which man or which woman can you trust with your heart, who do you trust to be close friends with your teenagers, which neighborhoods are safe to live in. So in making judgments in favor of one group or person or community, we are naturally, in a way, eliminating or judging against another person, group, or community. So we vote for businesses by shopping there. We vote for schools by choosing to send our kids there. We vote for the pastor and our congregation by attending and paying our tithes there, giving offerings. We vote for community by living there and by doing business there. And in so doing, by our choices, we make some people, excuse me, more wealthy, and we give some people more influence. So question is it possible that the choices that you made about these things that I have here, or even your choices in general, is it possible that at times they are motivated by fear? And if I answer for myself, I would have to say yes. And then the next question that comes to mind is, who is the source of this type of fear? Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Okay. Does this fear come from God? For we know that if you read the verse at the top, it says God is love. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it's there for you. 1 John 4:16. God is love. And we also have a verse here in 1 John 4:18, the first part of that says there is no fear in love, but perfect love casteth out fear. So the question is this: is God's love perfect? And if his love is perfect, what does his love do? It casts out fear. So we can make decisions based on truth and what God says rather than fear. So whenever the Bible says that we love him because he first loved us. And because he first loved us, I know that I am enabled to love other people. So when we receive God's love, the natural response to that is us loving. And as I know that I'm cared for and I am loved by God, I am protected by God, he has good plans for me, that all things work together for good for those who love God, I don't have to be controlled by fear anymore. I don't have to be motivated by fear. I don't have to worry about my own self-preservation. I don't have to spend all my time looking out for me because I have someone looking for me. I don't have to be motivated by fear. And if we know that all of God's judgments are good and all of his judgments come from a place of love, what else do we need? So back to my Bible study on the word judgment. So as I was going through reading verse after verse about judging and judgment and all those things, I found the verse that's on the next slide. John 7:24, King James Version. Judge not according to the appearance, but judge righteous judgment. So righteous judgment, what is that? Where does that come from? And that's what we're going to be talking about here for the next few minutes. Okay, go ahead and go to the next slide. There's a verse in Leviticus that I also found while I was doing the study. It said, be fair. And this is the CEV version, which is the contemporary English version. It was just the shortest version, shortest verse that I could set. That was in a quick, easy to read language. So that's why I chose that one. But anyway, it says, be fair. No matter who is on trial, don't favor either the poor or the rich. It seems like in our society today, we have a lot of compassion for poor people, which is good, and it's not bad to have compassion on those who are poor and less fortunate. But it says don't favor either the poor or the rich. So you can't because you can't favor one over the other. You have to choose righteously. You have to have righteous judgment. So it's not based on what people look like. It's not based on how much money they have or how much money they don't have. And also in the course of my study, I was studying the words like righteousness and righteous and that kind of thing. I found out something else. Going to the next slide. Okay, we've all heard this, the straight and narrow way, because straight is the gate and narrow is the way which leadeth unto life, and few there be that find it. We all know that verse. We've known that verse since we were children, most of us. But if you think about the English language, we have words for people that do good things, that aren't deceptive, words like upright, straightforward, on the level. And all of those words, all of those phrases indicate no turning or twisting or deviations. And so when I was reading through meanings for the words like righteousness and righteous and things like that in the Old Testament, I found out that this word righteousness contains the idea in the Hebrew language, that word for righteous has a meaning also of being straight, being upright, being narrow. And when I looked up words like iniquity and things like that, it had the idea of bending and twisting and distortion. So even the English word perversion, if you go to the next slide, I looked up, just did a Google search of the definition, and this is what came up. It says the alteration of something from its original course, meaning or state. I'm sorry, let me start over again. The alteration of something from its original course, meaning or state, to a distortion or corruption of what was first intended. So I have a demonstration here. You know, we've been eating out and bringing food home to eat. So I have a straw here. So can you see the straw, Dwayne? Okay, just making sure. So I have the straw here, and it represents the straight, right, narrow way. It's straight, it's not changing, but if I bend it, it only goes one direction, right? I can turn it this way, this way, this way, this way, this. No matter which way I turn it, it's still straight. Doesn't bend, doesn't change, doesn't twist. But I can twist this thing in any number of directions. I can twist it like that. I can twist it back this way and over this way and back that way and up that way and over that way. And that's what iniquity is. It's the bending of God's laws. And when you start bending God's laws, there's no telling where you're going to end up, because iniquity is the bending of God's truth. It's a distortion of truth. It's a deviation from the truth. So the next question is, where do we find righteous judgment? And if you could go to the next slide. So in order to be righteous, what does righteous mean? That means that I've always heard you need to be in right standing with God. Basically, you need to be aligned with his word. You need to be on the straight and narrow. And we all make mistakes. We all have our issues. We all have things that God's working with us, but our hearts toward God. And seeing that God is the creator of everything, he has the authority to decide what's right and what's wrong. And that somewhere along the way, and the church at times probably really hasn't helped this, people started feeling like being told the truth about what the Bible says isn't love. But God is always love. So his truth, his word, is based on love. God is always righteous. Because of this, we know God's judgment is always based on love, and God's judgment is always righteous. And God's judgment is always based on his unchanging word. The book that we have is a reflection of the words that God spoken, and the word, as Jesus came, he was the word, as we know from John 1. But anyway, in doing my Bible study on judgment and justice and righteousness, I realized something else. You can go to the next slide. When I looked at the word just and justice in the Old Testament in the Hebrew, I realized it was basically the same. It is the same word for righteousness. So at the bottom down here, I picked one of the words for righteousness because the word there in Hebrew has more than one form of the word. Just like in English, we have the word right, we have the word righteous, we have righteousness, or like the word judge, you have judge, judging, judgment, all those forms of the word. So this Hebrew word here that's listed there, I'm not going to try to say it, is translated in the Bible 128 times as righteousness and 15 times as justice. Now, in the Old Testament, the word justice is used 28 times, but all 28 times except for one, it's forms of the word there that I have written on the screen. So basically, righteousness is justice. It's the same thing. So what is the foundation for justice? The Bible. So if you want true justice, which is righteous judgment, which is God's judgment, because God cannot be wrong, his word cannot fail, it does not change. So if we want righteous, true judgment, we look to God and we look to the Bible. Okay, go ahead and go to the next slide. And as we've seen in our country, as we remove God from our society, as we downplay the fidelity of the Bible and we disregard the Bible and we kind of push it to the side and say it doesn't really matter so much. We disregard the straightness, the unchangingness, that's not a word, of the Bible, but anyway, what happens is the foundation of justice is eroded away. Justice is righteous, godly judgment based on truth, God's truth, the only truth in the Bible. And as as those are eroded away, what happens to justice? It falls, it tilts, and becomes injustice. Okay, go ahead and go to the next slide. So who will you choose and why? Who do you judge to be the best candidate? So think about it. Which party is more likely to uphold biblical principles? Which party is more likely to water down and downplay the impact of the Bible as policy? Oops, that's my phone. If you want justice, choose the candidates that uphold the Bible, because that is the only way that we get justice. Because biblical truth doesn't change. Remember the straw that I was holding up? That truth, quote unquote truth? That straw can be bent in any direction, And if you take justice that's not based on truth, that's based on twisting and perversion and changing and deviations, today that justice, quote unquote, may be in your favor, but tomorrow there's no telling where that justice is going to go. So if you want justice, the only way to get justice, which is righteous judgment, is by choosing candidates that uphold the Bible, because only through the Bible, only through God, only through God's love do we have righteous judgment. God's truth never changes, and people don't always get it right, but having the Bible as a foundation is the only chance we have to get justice. Okay, go to the next slide. What is the role of government? And it says, consider your source. The role of government, what should that be? What did the founding fathers intend that to be? What does the Declaration of Independence tell us that's going to be? Okay, go ahead and go to the next slide, Dwayne, please. Here's a very short video that he's going to play in just a second. I don't know if you recognize him. I know it's kind of a funny picture of him, but that's just what happened to show up him with his mouth open. His name is David Barton. He's the founder and president of a place called Wall Builders. And he has done a lot of research on the original documents. He owns a lot of original documents. And as a result of that, he is, according to their website, an expert in historical and constitutional issues. I've heard him speak before, and I have no doubt that he knows way more than I ever knew about the founding fathers and the original documents and those kinds of things. So in this video, he's going to share with us the 5 principles of government. Go ahead and start it, please.
When you look at who to vote for and how it relates to the rights of conscience, you have to understand that what our Declaration of Independence says, our founding document, it sets forth 5 principles of government. And anyone who goes into government is to support those 5 principles. And the first principle there it says that there is a moral law. It was called the laws of nature and nature's God. Between the Bible and nature, we know what right and wrong is. We can tell. God tells us clearly, don't steal and don't kill and don't purge. That's a moral law. So we start with a moral law that comes from God. And the second thing says, oh, by the way, there is a God. So we acknowledge that there is a creator. The third thing the Declaration tells us is that God gives us a certain set of inalienable rights, like life and like liberty and the right of self-defense and the right for association and free speech. Those are God-given rights. The fourth thing that the Declaration says is government exists primarily to protect God-given rights. And the fifth thing is that below that, you get to vote on everything else. So you don't get to vote on morals. You don't get to vote on what your rights are. God gives those to you, but you can vote on how wide the sidewalk should be or what the speed limit should be, etc. That's fine. Now, when it comes to electing someone, if you elect someone that says, I don't believe you should have rights of conscience, Okay,
it just goes on a little bit longer than what we really needed to. But anyway, so he's talking there that he got those 5 principles from the Declaration of Independence by studying the Declaration of Independence. So the role of government is to be based on moral law. And the role of government is to protect our inalienable rights, our God-given rights. And notice that we know that God is the giver of the moral law. God is the source. He is the giver of our rights and the giver of our government. He is the one that puts people in authority. But over the years, the role of government seems to have shifted. Because as the nation's view of God has shifted, the role of government has shifted. In Exodus 32, verse 1, whenever Moses had left and gone up to the mountain to get the 10 Commandments, and Moses was their representative. He's the one that communicated with God. He was their leader. He was the one in authority over them. He was, a godly leader. He was their rule. He was the one telling them where to go next. He's the only one that God really spoke to that they, really, anyway. And so In his absence, the people got nervous because they didn't have a leader. If Moses is gone, who's going to lead us? And so they went to Aaron and asked Aaron to make a god for them. Okay, the next slide. And so idolatry occurs when we replace God. When we replace the true and living God, which is our source of truth, the source of our rights, we realize that he is the source of the rights of other people. He's the source of our provision. He's the source of our security. When we replace the true and living God, the government is no longer performing its God-given role of protecting those things. Instead, the government becomes the replacement for God. It seems like to many people that the government is the source of those things. And that is idolatry. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Martin Luther King was created by God, positioned by God, called by God to bring justice. And he was successful. We still have issues that need to be worked out, things that need to be addressed. But in his time, things turned because of Martin Luther King. How did he lead the people? How did he bring about the change? And I was Googling some things about Martin Luther King, and I found some references from Christian sources about Martin Luther King and his fate. But on PBS, I found a reference that says, one night, as Martin Luther King sat alone in his kitchen, he believed that he heard the voice of Jesus speaking to him, urging him to stand up for justice. And King vowed to fight on. 3 days later, his house was firebombed, and King refused to give in to violence, proclaiming, "We still have the attitude of love." And based on those other readings that I was doing on Christian sites, he used biblical, he used Bible verses. From the sermons, from his messages that I've heard, they seem a lot like sermons to me. So he followed God. He led God. He followed God's leading. He used biblical principles. And in so doing, we can see how his use of these things, using truth as the foundation for justice, it worked. And is an example to us today about how we as Christians should judge. So the election that we've been talking about a little bit tonight is an example of how godly judgment can and should be used. So before we go, I want to remind you, please vote. Vote for biblical principles, because as you remove the Bible from our legal system, you're removing the chance for justice. And because whenever we pursue justice God's way, it works. Martin Luther King is a good example of how much positive change can come from doing that. Now, next week, we're going to talk more, but it's going to be more about, I don't think it's going to be related to so much to the politics, but about judgment, when we as a church should judge, how we should judge, who should judge, those kinds of things. And so that's all that I have for tonight. So Dwayne, back to you.
Thank you, Karen. Just such rich information, and I appreciate it. It's all so well studied and thought out. You've given us a lot to consider tonight. One of the thoughts I had, actually, when we're talking about fear, here's a question for you, maybe hypothetical, or what do they call that, rhetorical question, maybe something to chew on. I have always thought that fear was just a terrible thing. And years ago, a guy released a book. It was a self-help book called The Gift of Fear. And I shunned it. I shunned the idea of it. I was like, oh no, that's terrible. You know, this is just some awful thing. Well, I saw him on a talk show talking about it, and he said, there is the gift of fear is not walking down a dark street alone at night. The gift of fear is driving the speed limit and paying attention and all that. So I think that's a question when we were talking tonight. Is there such a thing as healthy fear? And I think there is. I think maybe that's, the verse that says God has not given us a spirit of fear, but a power, love, and sound mind. Sound mind may be that healthy fear, that healthy awareness of our, pain or mortality or whatever, but obviously we're not supposed to be taken captive or controlled by fear. We're supposed to be able to rise above it. But I think there's a certain dose of that, like children fear their parents. Sometimes it's a fear, it's not just all love. That at some point they have to fear in order for there to be discipline,
Yeah,
So,
true.
George, you have some things you want to add?
Yeah, I wanted to explore a little with Karen about justice. Back in, I don't know if it was the 1920s when women in 20, I think it was, when they were allowed to vote. The question I'm asking, it wasn't just for women back then. There was justice for women, and they had to fight for justice. The status quo back there with men was that what they were doing was righteous by not allowing women to vote. In their minds, it was right. It was a righteous act not to allow women to vote. The question I'm asking then, does justice change over time with new information?
I think we all change as people as God shows us, because they probably thought they were righteous in doing that to a certain degree, but I think a lot of it had to do with pride. That they didn't think the women knew enough, and they thought they knew better, and that kind of thing. And none of us are perfect, for sure, and we all have things that God has to show us over time. And there's nothing wrong. Peter and James and John, they had civil disobedience in that they were told not to preach Christ, and they preached Christ anyway. So there are times definitely that we need to speak up and say, this isn't fair and this isn't right. Job talks about many times about how he was a righteous man because he helped the orphans and he helped the widows and that kind of thing. So our perception of righteousness, of justice, may change over time, but justice itself doesn't change over time. Speaking about women, Jesus spoke to the Samaritan woman, even though she was Samaritan and even though she was a woman. So in God's economy, I guess you would say, in God's government or structure, the woman's value never changed, but culturally the value changed. So does that answer your question?
Yes, that's a fair comment, because I'm also thinking that those of us who are in the kingdom of God has to be also aware that Jesus gave many examples of, for example, the woman that was caught in the act of adultery. Those that claim righteousness were ready to stone her.
Right.
And Jesus had to say, well, look, you have sins in your life also, so behave yourself. Don't treat her as if she's not the daughter of God. She's someone who needs to, of course, to repent, but you don't treat her as a cast out. So I think, judgment. I love your lesson, because I think good judgment is always based on the information that you have. And if you have false information, or there's error in your information, of course you're going to base your judgment on that error that you have.
Right.
And I think sometimes we have to reconsider why we're doing what we're doing. Or question some of the information that we may have. Is it correct? And
Right.
just because we've been doing it for years doesn't mean it's now judgment.
Or that our family's been doing it for years, or that, the culture around us has been doing it for years. Yeah, I was doing a little bit of reading on the abolitionists. The abolitionists, a lot of them were Christians. If they weren't Christian, they were still basing it a lot on Christian ideals. It was the church, like I mentioned before, in Boston that we visited, that they were saying that church in particular had a lot to do with the freeing of the slaves, and that was not popular. I was reading today about how the abolitionists in the South, they were hated, and in the North sometimes they were mobbed and that kind of thing. I didn't do a lot of detailed reading into it, but when you stand up for right, see, that's the thing. We have to choose God's word over what we fear will happen. As Charles Stanley says, we obey God and leave all the consequences to him. But part of that is being intimately related with God and his word. His word is very clear in what's right and what's wrong, but the spirit within us is what guides us into all truth. And the more that we in our personal lives have those foundational blocks of truth in our life, the more that we allow the spirit to guide us into all truth, the more righteous our judgments will be, the wiser our judgments will be. But as we kind of systematically remove those things and disregard those things, our own judgment becomes tilted and twisted and off balance, and we don't even realize it.
And I think the key word there, Karen, is if we allow.
Yes.
If we allow. That's the key word there. Karen, one more thing. If you don't, I noticed you had a straw and you were making a valid point where you were saying, here is a standard, and you were holding the straw. And sometimes what we do, we bend that. And this is the thing that bothers me sometimes. I see when we're talking about a set of values or issues, we use one standard of measurement for this particular person or individual or circumstance over here. But the circumstance and the individual may change, but we use a different standard as Christians to measure the same incident if somebody else is doing it. And I find that like very pharisaical, very hypocritical. One standard we use here and we ignore when other person do a similar thing, but we use a different standard of measurement. And I think your example there about bending the straw is an excellent example.
It's very true, and I found myself doing that sometimes with that. And you need is that verse was saying in the beginning in Matthew 7, it says, take the mote out of your own eye first. So you make a valid point, but me, if I were you, and not because there's anything wrong with you, just because we're just both Christians together kind of thing. So I'm not saying this to look down on you, but we all need to pray that God will show us where we are acting unjustly, because we all make decisions every day, and they're not always based on justice. Sometimes we're friendlier with some people, maybe because they have more money, or we're not as friendly with other people because of where we find them out in the position or the job that they have, or whether they can do something for us or not. If we think they can do something for us, we're more likely to be a little friendlier. You know what I'm saying? And so we all need to examine ourselves and ask God to show us the truth and show us where we are falling short of his measure of love, because we all have blind spots. We all have things that we're working on, for sure. Thank you, George. You always have very insightful questions and comments.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Karen, for teaching tonight. It's 8:00, and if anybody else on the call had anything else they wanted to say, you're welcome to. We just want to, if you do, you're welcome to unmute yourself. But those of you who joined us on Facebook, I just want to acknowledge some of you, like Sister Frida. I think I already acknowledged Karen and Wanda, and we have Teresa. Hey, Teresa. And Sister Viola, who joined us here. Those are some of the people. I think I saw Rufus Smith on here earlier. And we just appreciate all of you joining in. and interacting. Especially when you interact, then we're all doing this together. And even if you type your name and say, where you're from or you're watching, that's a blessing to us. I just want to say before we sign off too, I was bragging about everybody being involved. And one thing I wanted to say is that we're very encouraged. When we come to church on a Sunday morning, you can't help but think about what church was like back in January or February. When we were in one service, we were shoulder to shoulder with each other. So that's what we keep going back to. But I think what God has spoke to me recently is not to keep looking back there, but to realize that we are slowly building. We are slowly coming out of that shutdown. And one of the ways that God showed me was we keep account on Sunday morning of attendance, and putting on an old suit coat, I pulled it out and I saw the attendance from it probably was 2 or 3 months ago. And it's been a slow, steady increase. And, we're not all about numbers for numbers' sake, but numbers indicate people who are being touched and people who are coming there for ministry. And we do have some new people that have joined us over the past few months, even those who never joined us even before shutdown. And we're just grateful for those. We're excited about what God is doing at Southside through all of our ministry channels, and on Sunday mornings at 9 and 11. Those of you who tune in, those of you who are there with us, you'll see there's just an excitement in the air. We're excited about Saturday drive-through prayer. We have other things that are on the drawing board. We're not in a holding pattern by any means. We are pressing ahead, and we're finding maybe detours of how to press ahead, but we're working on it like every week. We're bringing these things to the table. How can we do this, even if we have to do it differently than what we did before? And I think that's what it's going to take. Maybe it's just something like this that took us off autopilot a little bit and helped us really focus in on what we need to be doing. So I appreciate all of you, appreciate your support. Thank you for your giving. Your faithful giving is what keeps us going. And thank you again, Karen, for teaching tonight. We will see you all this weekend. Tune in to the Celebrate Good News tomorrow night. As you know, we're not necessarily live when we do that. We premiere it live. And then Sunday morning, we will go live again. So God bless you all. We love you.
Dwayne.
Yes.
Did your dear wife put the pictures of the family that was freed on Facebook?
Okay, now we just got those pictures yesterday. We got a ton of pictures. In order for us to put them on Facebook, I have to go in and blur out all their faces. And
Okay.
So there's 40 something pictures. What we are going to do Sunday morning, we will show a video with all those pictures in it, but we will not broadcast it.
Okay.
But what we will do is we're going to, I will get some pictures and blur their faces out to advertise to the whole church. It's amazing. If you weren't there on Sunday, we collected enough money to free a family from slavery, modern day loan sharking. And, I came home yesterday, Leanne was looking at the pictures and crying. And it really is emotional. You see the joy in these people's faces that basically in one day, their lives are changed. And just like the song says, my chains are gone, I've been set free. That's exactly what happened to these people. And it's an amazing thing. So if you're there Sunday, you'll see the video. If not, you will see the pictures, and I will get them to where I can blur out their faces.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for giving, and thank you for being here tonight, and all your questions. We look forward to next week too, Karen.
Yeah.
God bless you all.